Hello, and welcome back to another interview on the conversations of integrating yoga and psychology. And today we have Bhavani Maki, who lives on the island of Kauai and is an international yoga teacher, author of the Yogi's Roadmap, which all serious yoga practitioners should have on their bookshelf. She is my teacher and has really absolutely transformed the way that I approach yoga, study yoga, and I'm forever grateful. So I could sit here and talk on and on about Bhavani. She's a massive blessing to the discipline of yoga today. And thank you, Bhavani, for joining us for this conversation.
It's my pleasure. I love sitting with you both.
Yeah.
Always a good time.
We
love
so I
having
thought
you on.
a good question to start is very often in the study of yoga, we will hear yoga philosophy. And Bhavani has a different approach to that word, which I love. So I thought we could start with why you might think yoga is more of a psychology versus a philosophy.
You know, timing is everything, and you're right on point. In the Yoga Sutra mentorship, we were just exploring the 49th Sutra, which I know you know. Shrutanumana pragnapyam vishaya visheshartatvat. So in context, you've gone through 49 sutras, which speak about yoga as being your capacity for revelation. And insight is when you see a pattern that you didn't recognize before. And so suddenly you're like, oh, wow, look, I've been stuck in this cycle. And then it talks about yoga as your ability to expand your awareness, to open your mind, open your heart. And then it goes through the vritti. The first vritti, what is it, Sarah? Pramana, which is right knowledge. And Patanjali even says, be careful, because when you know something to be true, it may or may not have any impact on your personal growth. And in fact, the ego is built up by what it thinks it knows. And then it becomes so protective that to change its point of view is as difficult as dying a slow, painful death. So that's very significant. And even though he's mapping out consciousness, he says, just, hold it loosely, because knowing things blocks you. And then in that 49th Sutra, he says, oh God, this is so juicy. He says, look, I've only been able to speak in generalities. I'm from another time, but this is the human condition and the possibilities of human consciousness. And he says, it's not about you understanding these things and trying to feed your life into this understanding. The liberation process actually occurs through life itself. So, it's like use the teachings in order to gain perspective of what you're going through. But ultimately, what you're going through has more viability, more life force, more context, and that we learn through living life. So yoga, instead of trying to live your life through yoga, how can yoga live through your life? So then it becomes about, the yoga helps us to develop we're attracted to a certain philosophy because it corresponds to our epistemology, our values, what we believe to be true, how we are, our worldview. But then ultimately, our philosophy is tested by our life. And this is where we can become really rigid in our philosophy. So it's about being eclectic in our understanding and having an evolving point of view. And Patanjali calls this the ripening process. So we all come in with everything we need, but it's not mature. And so for me, it's like rather than look at it as yoga philosophy, it's about our psychology. I hope that was
Spot on.
clear.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about how we choose to live and show up and grow and use our experiences to practice the yoga.
And to change your mind, it's like the possibilities of our imagination and creativity. That's where it's really at.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good segue into how do we change our mind?
Yes.
Because
Well,
it's very, very challenging, and a teaching that I've learned from you about the wheel of karma has really supported a way to see the loops or the samskaras happening within our daily life. And ultimately, yoga is about waking up and having the choice. So maybe if it's okay, I'll read a little segment to kind of set the tone. It's from Bhavani's book, and it's on page 181, and it's in the Wheel of Karma section. Reinventing the Wheel is the paragraph. So, yoga as the path of self realization through self emancipation is what breaks us free of samskara's wheel of conditioned existence and never ending cycles of pain. Its very purpose is to give us the necessary insights and tools to break into the feedback loop of karma and clear the residual collection in the mind body complex. And as we open our eyes to the possibilities of choice, we extract ourselves from avidya and eyes wide open and begin to reshape the foundation of our vasana, renaissancing our personality, psychology, and all the other layers of the psyche and chitta. How does it feel when somebody reads your book to you?
it's interesting.
Who wrote that? It was beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And it's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So you want to talk on maybe the wheel of karma or how that kind of allows us some framework to change our mind and change our habits?
Now it's become part of the consensus understanding, and this is because there's so much science-based research to affirm what the yogis discovered. But Patanjali, he said it's easier to change your body than your mind. So we use the practices to, we're like, oh, we never thought that was possible. And we start to see the differences, certainly through the squeezing and soaking action in the body, the way that it works the endocrine system. We can sense how working with our physical body makes physiological changes, which then present as biochemistry, neurochemicals, and how we feel. Now, however, some people get stuck there. And they don't realize that, you can induce these states and experience these endorphin highs, but then how do you begin to tease apart the patterns in interpersonal relationship? So yoga, of course, is about relationship. And first we start with ourselves, but then how do we take that out into the world so it becomes our psychology? And psyche is about how we're responding internally to our external environment. So it's about that interconnectivity. And this is where, we do need therapy. Sadly, there's still a bit of a stigma around therapy where people think, it's interesting. It's like people think it needs to be really bad, that they need to be in big trouble in order to go seek psychoanalysis. And then by the time they realize that it's really bad, and I know this directly. It's like, oh my God, if I if I take the lid off of this, it's going to be Pandora's box and I'm going to be in therapy for the rest of my life, you know, and there's like this fear around it, or that if we touch the wound. But the beauty about therapy is no one's going to give us that perspective in life. And you're dealing with trained individuals, and a therapist sees your wholeness. So where we have this shame and this fear, and we can't see a way out because that's the nature of the psyche, what's unconscious, we can't see it. You know, that's natural. But when we can use the therapist as our advocate who can say, you know, that is a valid concern. How might you reframe it? What are your choices here versus this is just plain neuroses and it's self-negation. You know, they give us a perspective where everybody else has some kind of an agenda. Like, I want to be your friend. I want you to like me. I want to be the authority. There's really the relationship is in a different context, which allows for honest, open exchange. So, you know, there's no coincidence that Patanjali was not only an Ayurvedic doctor and understood how we can use the body to leverage the mind. And then as a, you know, in the Yoga Sutras, he spoke about the possibilities of consciousness. And that's really what therapy does, but more on an individual level. That is one of the great alliances, is having a good teacher and having a good therapist. And it's such a gift. It just adds so much depth. And in the Sutra 147, he speaks about nirvichara vaisharatyatma prasadanam, that someone who is an awakened being, and it doesn't mean they don't have shadows, but they shine the light of love into it, they develop compassion for themselves and compassion for all. And this is a really important part of it. You know, there's kind of like this sense that everybody should have it together. But really, life is for learning and embracing that, and, you know, living in the question, exploring new pathways. It's about really being open with yourself and choosing an ally who can support you, who's seen the pattern so much and who has hopefully gone through the process themselves. So they also have that sense of empathic compassion.
When there's so much that you just talked about, to start like from a somatic psychology perspective, we honor that body, what the body has to say. And as you noted, if I change the body, I'm going to change the mind. And we can see this happen just in posture. We can see this happen in whether you smile or frown, or how far you smile. Do you smile all the way to your eyes or not? We can manipulate movement in order to bring about awareness for some of the deep inner structures of the body, like the pelvic floor, the diaphragm around the lungs, places where people are often holding tension and traumas. And for some people, we can talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. And eventually, most of us are going to get some relief and get there. But when we move through a physical structure first, the brain has an experience. That experience creates a new neurology. And now all of a sudden, I have a new way of thinking about it that may have just taken place in the 3 minutes I was in an asana. So that I'm sitting in this posture, going through this experience that then creates a new way of being. And as you noted, through the endocrine system and the biochemistry of it all. And you're so right, everyone deserves therapy. When else can you talk to someone trained to actively listen, which is what your nervous system and your brain need to regulate, with no bias in what you decide to do? And we take that relationship, and it's a little petri dish to be able to say, let's make these uncomfortable things overt here in this room. And then you can take that out into your other relationships with more success, because your best friend, your partner, your coworker aren't necessarily going to be the ones who are going to be able to support you in that overt vulnerability. everyone deserves therapy, not just when there's something wrong.
And that's now it becomes a political discussion, and we won't go there, but I was speaking to this colleague, and she's a spiritual teacher, and she was telling me she grew up in Ireland, that in Ireland, every student who goes to university or college is given free therapy. And I thought, oh my God, how wonderful. I mean, it really should be like going to the dentist, that you at least have an annual check-in. Then if there's the need for continued care, or because what is psychotherapy? It means care of the soul.
Right.
And it's so important what you said, about, this sense of being able to have a safe space, because we have, and this also depends very, very much on our culture. There's taboos. And that to me is a red flag. When something can't be talked about or touched, it's an indication that something's going to fester and putrefy, and it's ultimately going to erupt. So it's a really, really wonderful, you'll discover parts of yourself that make your life more robust. Yeah.
And I have a number of notes in my book from when Bhavani was here teaching us. I wrote all over it. But one of the things you said in that workshop was, yoga helps us give up magical thinking, looking for someone to take care of us and carry us. So it really helps us come into our own strength. You also, as part of that talk, talked about, the ego is with the inhales, and where we really draw and assert that control and power over ourselves, and then where we let that go, which maps to the sympathetic and parasympathetic and heart rate variability and respiratory sinus arrhythmia and all these other systems of the body that yoga taps into in the process of whatever system that you particularly gravitate towards, but that you're going through this process back and forth with the breath to the body, and you're sitting and holding it so that you become stronger within this whole system that you are. And you can really own who you are without this idea that someone's going to rescue me and save me. I can come into relationship as a full me so that you can be a full you. And together we can create something larger than the sum of our two parts into a we, rather than one of us getting enmeshed into another and or finding ourselves in abusive situations.
There's just so much juice in what you shared. And even this sense of, the third sutra speaks about like a state of health is authenticity. And he says, Tada drashtuhu svarupe vastanam. Vastanam means incarnation. So when we have a big enough field that nothing is rejected, that we can hold everything within that field of love, we truly incarnate. And so many people are fixated with idea of ascension, but Patanjali speaks about really living your life. And so many people are thinking their life. They're not living their life. They're not like, how can I say, in that state of openness. And so it's really wonderful because Patanjali says, when you're in your authentic self, your nervous system drops. And we can see that as the parasympathetic, and people tend to be oscillating up here. So that's when they're in the reptilian brain, which doesn't evolve. And what is authentic self? That's even something we may have ideas and we hold on to. But again, this is about creativity and imagination and the beauty of life. And we can kind of circle back to karma. is that there's going to be things that happen to us that are happening for us. And in the sutras, Patanjali calls it parinama, which is the evolutionary force. Everything is evolving, everything is adapting. So being in your true self isn't being one thing, it's realizing your dynamic awareness, that you have infinite choices. There's the choices you know, there's the choices that you don't know, and then there's the choices that are unknown that remain to be discovered. So, it's like, I remember reading a psychology book, and it was saying how just by entering a room in a different way, through another door, or walking backwards, this is where we kind of defrag the system from becoming, so many people are flat, or they have a very little range of emotions. That authenticity, as mirrored in the Hindu pantheon, there's a place for being passionate, for being vulnerable, for being intense, for being cooperative. There's just a huge range that's available to us. And hopefully what we can do by shape shifting our bodies and approaching things differently is explore that within our own relationships.
Right. Yes.
How
And
we-
that's,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Sarah.
Okay, go.
I was just thinking, it's so wonderful that we can have a tool that allows us to come in, because so many people are, they're just walking little heads. They just want to be stuck in the mind, even though mind lives in every cell of the body. They're just stuck in this idea of who they think they are and the way we've always been and how it's always gone. And they don't have a great way of blowing up that neurology that has got them so stuck, which actually isn't even just about their lifetime. It's these other lifetimes that have come through into their epigenetics that says, oh yeah, remember that famine that we went through a couple generations ago? We know how to get through that if it happens to us again. So you better remember, when you feel like this, we might be at a lack of food coming up. And so there's all this stuff that we're carrying around all the time. And we don't even realize the patterns and the outlines we've been given that have just been handed down to us. And when we can be conscious of that by going through a process that allows us to just step back from and to commit to ourselves and who we want to be, we have this whole other way of being that opens up. And as you mentioned earlier, so many choices we didn't even know we had.
To the women who wear multiple hats, it makes me think of the different qualities of a student and somebody who comes in and burns really, really hot, burns out, and in the ability to allow ourselves to feel many emotions, play many roles in our lives, show up in different ways, gives us the freedom to have the longevity that this discipline asks for. And I see this, and I'm sure you both do as well, where when we're like stuck in the I am around anything, I am this, and this is how I will present consistently over time. That's that hot fire that ends up burning out because it's not authentic, it's not exciting. And when you're stuck in that pattern, now you can't mold into different environments.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
go ahead.
oh, I was just saying, and everything flattens out.
That's it. And Patanjali says when you get stuck in these ideas, you become a shadow of who you are. Vritti sarupyam itaratra. You actually identify with the projections that were put onto you. And then what do we do in an unsophisticated psychology and nervous system? Rather than, this goes back to karma, pain is your power, because behind the pain is the healing. And yoga is about healer, heal thyself. So when we realize that, you know, behind that's that sense of Vivasana is behind the ancestral wound is the wish, and we're healing that part of our lineage, and then this heals the collective. So yeah, it takes courage to touch these parts of yourself. And guess what? That 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 experience will never go away, but your relationship to it changes. And we don't, as we know with trauma, when we don't, trauma is healed in the now. And as much as we may go into this story, it's more about, it's like what Gabor Mate says. It's like, where do I feel this story in my body? We can unwind that. If we don't want to touch it, then it actually eclipses everything we're doing, and we're kind of reverting back to when that wound took place. We get stunted in that place. So, you know, we can transform our relationship around it and realize that this gives us that compassion from ourselves. I love what they say in IFS, that as long as we don't touch that part of the wound, it becomes like a splinter of ourself, a fractured part of ourself, and we move from the wound. Yoga means to reclaim our wholeness. And this is when we speak to the wound, and our healing impulse becomes contagious in the world.
It does. People want to be closer to folks who've done their work and have healed their wounds because they're calmer. They're easier to be around often. There's a you feel it in their somatic system that they just feel more open and expansive, which is always health and healing. And so when people have truly done their work and they've healed these, it's not that they don't have the scars and they don't have the stories and they don't have difficulty. It's that they can sit with all of that difficulty and not be in chaos. And people feel that. They gravitate towards it because it feels so good.
Yeah. And it's so lovely because then, you know, you become a safe space in the world in which nothing is rejected. And it's just it's so magnificent the way that everything's connected. So there's this sense, it kind of goes back to our ideas of what health is. And health is understanding that there's a larger process and there's a larger rhythm. And, you know, this is like, all we have to do is look in nature. Look at how the plants weather the storms. Look at how they regenerate. Look at the resilience. Look at the diversity, the creativity. And we are the only species who tries to lord over nature. We're the only ones who manipulates it with, like, to the extremes of genetic modification, etc. But when we can embrace that force that, yeah, we're going to be challenged, because challenge is really going to help us to access parts of ourselves that would have been unknown otherwise. So it's not supposed to be easy. Can we find ease in that difficulty? And that's that sense of shraddha, where avidya is like, I don't want to know. I don't want to look at it. I want to ignore it because it's too overwhelming and too painful. Shraddha is that commitment to love as the evolutionary force that is growing us.
Right. And trauma is always evolutionary. When people go through trauma, we have, you know, if you look at it just on a continuum, right, you have post-traumatic stress on one end, which is, we've got rigidity, we've got difficulty, we've got narrowing of experiences and tissues. People become smaller and smaller and smaller in their experience of the world. And then when we heal from that, on the other side of that is post-traumatic growth, which is a lot of openness, expansion. When we see people who have navigated through a traumatic experience well, we see all this capacity that they didn't have before, because they have now evolved themselves to be able to hold more than they were prior to that event. They're much stronger in who they are and who they are in the world, than they were prior to that event. But it takes the commitment to do the healing, and that can be very, very difficult.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that. It's because we only tend to see part of the arc, don't we? We don't understand the full arc. And something I'd like to just touch upon, because you've used this word a few times, Sarah, is the aspect of discipline. So when we hear the word discipline, a lot of people have magical thinking around that, like, oh, if the stars align and if, you know, if it's meant to be and it's all good, it's like Patanjali says, you like all the forces are working with you. You just have to bring eagerness. You just have to bring, you don't even have to be capable. You just have to be willing. So discipline comes from disciple, which means a student. To be a student, you don't have to have it all figured out. And in fact, knowing that you don't is where the opening occurs. And I remember talking to my therapist, and he went through this rigorous program of a dieta. And so it was like a very limited diet. And then also he wasn't allowed physical contact. This was of his own free volition. So he couldn't hug his husband or friends or, you know, et cetera. It was like very, very stringent. And I said, oh my God, you're so disciplined. And he said, I see it more as an act of self-love.
Mm.
And that was just so beautiful, you know? So it's really like, it's so interesting, you know, it's like we have to in some way to create the healthy container and realize that the container, even though there's a sense of containment, it's going to shift over time. But, you know, according to the Hawaiian word kuleana is your privilege, your duty, and your right. When you understand what's in your realm of personal responsibility and you hold yourself accountable, then you also understand what isn't in that realm of possibility or of accountability. And this is where there's real healthy growth. And that's really hard to navigate on your own, isn't it?
Yes.
Especially those of us who are drawn to yoga because we're so deeply empathic and we hear words like limitless and infinite and unconditional. Where in the realm of the spirit, you know, it's very simple. In the context of relationships, it's a lot more intricate because we're really complex beings.
It's very true. Very true. And as we noted in some of our other conversations, that the goal isn't to just be easeful all the time. The goal isn't to always be happy. And I know you have that written in your book too, but I can't figure out which page it's on. But it's you know, that yoga is not just about making it so that we're all fine, we're all happy, we're all in this, like as Sarah says, it's not just good vibes only. it's this deeper uncovering and finding and mining of the riches that are within us.
To loop back what Bhavani was talking about earlier is that these practices are designed to shape shift the body and the endocrine system. And that gives us this access point over time to the sensation. But really, what yoga is the integration of that experience that is in the container of our sticky mat or our meditation cushion into our relationships and into how we show up outside of the yoga shala. So that's and as you were touching on, Bhavani, and that's where the role of the seeker is to then get the support needed through psychotherapy to bridge that. And this is something that I've been working on. It's like, yeah, I can sit in my yoga shala, do my pranayama practices or my asana or whatever, my mantra, and like feel that radiant light. But where is that point when I'm in it deeply in my relationship? And so, that's really the intention here is the integration of yoga and psychology and recognizing where these tools are supportive and where they're also limiting and where we need to, bring it together.
Yeah, it's about understanding, tato dwa dwa nabigataha. We live in this field of polarity. And Patanjali says, but then the yogi is no longer assaulted by the polarities of opposites and realizes that it's a dynamic field that is stretching us. And so much of it is, yes, self-regulation, recognizing that there's solutions we haven't even been able to imagine yet.
Mm-hmm.
How relationships are actually expanding our nervous system and how we can cooperate together. That's a huge part of it. It's like, well, this is my truth and I'm standing in my truth. It's like, okay, well, there's a bigger picture. Can I lean into something bigger? And this is a real shift in the nervous system too, because, even the wise sage is hardwired for fight and flight, but a lot of people don't get out of that. So can we, as we learn to drop in and 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 realize that the unknown is our friend, that we're being grown through the experience. That's that sense of Shraddha again, that love is big enough to allow you to have your needs and your perspective. And love, if it's truly a loving, growing relationship, you're going to allow me to have my perspective. And then there's like the triad, which is the care of the relationship. So it's amazing. It's like everybody has it's just amazing that we can even drive down the highway and not, have these massive collisions. Like there is a bigger structure. So we're working with our individual consciousness, but then we realize like we're part of a bigger awareness together. And that synergy, that cooperative force, we're going to bump up against each other. My teacher Rama would say that, relationship is where my rough edges bump up against your rough edges, and there's going to be a refinement.
Yeah, the way you defined nirodha in many ways, of course, but in the ability to hold multiple perspectives at once has really landed and continues to land, as well as our ability to self-regulate. So if we can self-regulate and then recognize that we're here to recognize our own wholeness as well as everyone else's, and holding those perspectives within it really shifts the objective of yoga.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bhavani, you have been extremely generous with your time and sharing your wisdom. So let's see. What else anything we want to add? I know that I want to share Bhavani so she's on Kauai, but is accessible weekly, which is a massive blessing for her students and for any curious yoga student out there. She has a weekly Yoga Sutra mentorship, and it's this round is almost over, so chapter 1 is almost over, but you can get the recordings, and on to chapter 2 we go. So that is a wonderful offering that if you are curious about the integration of yoga and psychology, a great resource, and you get the recordings too, so you don't have to attend it live, which is key for a lot of us, including myself.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, when we hear the word chapter 2, it's not so much sequential. In fact, the chapters are called padas because the sutras are circular. It's not contingent that you've read the first chapter. The second chapter or the second pada is the second foot. It's like, it's really learning to appreciate the kleshas, the friction that we're going to experience in our life. It's a very pragmatic chapter in how to galvanize the yoga practices, how to work with these tensions in life, and how to embody the wisdom that's already within you with greater consciousness and in relationships. So yeah, it's really exciting to be able to offer that. And a really important part of it is this what we're doing now is Sangata, because everybody has pieces and parts, and it's in the conversation that we experience Nirodha, which is the expanded awareness. We grow each other. So I really love that part of it. And whether or not you're attending live, there's room for breakout and group discussion. And I learned so much because we grow together. You know, even though yoga is so much of an internal experience, it is in the end about how life is growing us through relationship and through these deeper conversations. So it's super robust, and you know, it's something I look forward to every week.
We all do. As a student of that program, I think you know, if I were to give advice, starting at chapter 2 might be almost the place to start, really, because it is the practice pada where it's more tangible, more chewy. So starting, you know, in the next couple of weeks is really wonderful. And also I've gone through chapter 1 twice. And, you know, so it's like, it's really, truly endless. And it's a beautiful offering to stay, you know, curious and dive in with a senior teacher who lives on an island very far away. But you get her every week. Yeah, so I couldn't recommend that more. So Bhavani's information will be in the email, so you can click over to her website and find that. Anything anyone else wants to add?
I don't want it to end. That's a lot. I learned so much from being with the both of you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Bhavani. It's always wonderful to talk to you and hear how you distilled it down and then bring it back out to the rest of us, because you make it make so much sense.
You make it make a lot of sense to me too. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Aloha.